What in tarnation is going on at the FDA? Are they firing or hiring or what? Maybe it's like Schrödinger's cat, and as long as we don't open the box, they'll be both firing and hiring the same people at the same time, except that our linear way of seeing reality demands, nay, requires us to know if our chicken thighs are being inspected or they're not. It has to be one or the other, right? I mean, it can't be both. It can't be both. Or can it? Welcome to today's installment of Eat is Love TV, where we will attempt to unravel the quantum paradox that is the FDA these days, if you've been following the news. Or if you haven't, let me see if I can catch you up. First, they were firing a bunch of people and announced that they were going to stop all food inspections, but then they announced that they were going to rehire the people that they had just fired, and particularly those people who were supposed to be responsible for food inspections, except that those people were never fired in the first place, except that it turns out that they were. But long before they announced the rehiring, it turns out that a whole gaggle of staff just left in frustration, partly because they knew that there would be no way to do their jobs properly after all the staffing cuts, and partly because they just saw the writing on the wall and decided it was better to leave on their own terms rather than stick around and wait for the Doge hatchet to find its way to their necks. And then there were some who left as a kind of a protest. Now, if you watched my terrific video about the new food labels a while back, then you may recall that Jim Jones was one such individual. Jones, who had been the FDA's deputy commissioner, left the agency out of frustration after 89 of his key staff had been told to get a box and put their things in it, but those 89 were just a drop in the bucket. Over the past few months, the FDA lost about 20% of its workforce, meaning that about 3,500 of their staff were told to vamoose. This places the FDA toward the top of the list of those agencies most heavily impacted by recent staffing cuts. The official line given to the press by Commissioner Marty Makary was that no scientists nor inspectors had been cut, but this flies in the face of the fact that many scientists had in fact been relieved of their posts in testing labs all across the country and Puerto Rico, including many who had been working on research on avian flu safety. But then in a complete 180, a statement went out saying that the firings were just the result of incorrect job classification codes, and the agency attempted to rehire specialists working on outbreaks of foodborne pathogens and the safety of infant formula. So it seems like many of those fired absolutely were scientists and inspectors. Or maybe this is some kind of quantum paradox and they were scientists and not scientists at the same time, just as they were fired and not fired at the same time, just as inspections were going to continue and cease at the same time. So apparently we'll all understand this just as soon as we read up on Heisenberg and Bohr and Einstein and Schrödinger and all of our other favorite quantum mechanics. But that being said, as of now, we still don't know how many of those fired employees will be allowed to return. We can say, however, that those who left in protest or disgust or frustration are unlikely to return ever, and this will undoubtedly take its toll on the agency's ability to perform inspections, not to mention continue their research on the safety and efficacy of the products that you will undoubtedly find on the shelves at your local grocery or drugstore. Does your chicken have salmonella? No. And yes, it's both true and not true. Can salmonella make me really sick or kinda dead? Well, let's just go with a hard yes on that one. Will expensive brand name drugs be eligible for generic versions? Well, that one is a no, but yes, but no, but no, but yes, but yes, but no, but maybe for now. Is food inspection relevant to your life? Well, it depends on how opposed you are to things like rat feces, human blood, and E. coli in your food. You might think I'm just being gross and hyperbolic, but I'm actually quite serious, so listen up. You see, we didn't always have people checking up on the safety of our food. Most people didn't really think about it much until an uppity author named Upton Sinclair, around the turn of the 20th century, wrote a book you might have heard of titled The Jungle, wherein he exposed the filthy and often cruel conditions of the meat industry of the time, where it wasn't uncommon for meat products like sausage to leave the plant containing significant amounts of rat droppings and even human blood from workers who had been injured from working in unsafe and unsanitary conditions. The publication of Sinclair's book was followed by an uproar among consumers whose dietary choices did not include rodent poo-poo and bits of people's fingers, and this led to the passage of the Meat Inspection Act of 1906 and the Pure Food and Drug Act. Before that time, the Fed's main focus had been on agricultural research, but now Teddy Roosevelt was going to see to it that they were going to start poking around to make sure the public was getting food that was safe. And poking is exactly what they did. Initially, inspections were performed by a technique known as the poke and sniff method, which entailed an inspector with a metal rod literally poking it into the meat and then giving it a good sniff to see if it smelled nicey nice or icky ick. As you might guess, it wasn't the most accurate detection system, and in fact, if they poked their rod into a chunk of meat that was infected but not smelly enough to fail inspection, then that now contaminated rod would get poked into the next bit of beef, which was actually likely to spread the pathogen even further. But despite its flaws, things did improve and less contaminated meat went to market. The way I see it, that just tells you how bad things must have been. If the poke and sniff method actually improved the safety of meat, then it had to have been just incredibly grody before then. Now, as time passed, more advanced inspection methods were developed and implemented while the FDA's authority was strengthened. Apparently, the American public placed a pretty high value on the notion that the food on the shelves should be safe and doo-doo free. I suppose that's reasonable. 1938 saw the passage of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which on the one hand armed the FDA with much more authority, but also led to the loophole known as GRAS, aka generally regarded as safe, which you may remember from my earlier videos. A lot of manufacturers felt unnecessarily burdened by having to prove again and again the safety of time-tested common ingredients like flour and sugar, so the law was amended to allow for certain ingredients to be classified simply as generally regarded as safe or GRAS. The way the law was written was appropriate in its time and left a lot of interpretation up to the producers because back then you could actually do that sort of thing. But as the world and the food industry became more complicated, the GRAS designation has become less and less meaningful. At this time, it's pretty much on the honor system. All a manufacturer has to do is declare that an ingredient is generally recognized as safe. It doesn't need to be tested. There's no oversight from any agency whatsoever. The manufacturers themselves aren't even actually required to do their own internal testing. Legally speaking, it basically means nothing. So next time you hear someone say that an ingredient has been given a GRAS designation, just remember that this only means that Kraft or Hormel or Kellogg's or whomever has just decided to say so. Absolutely nobody is watching. Meanwhile, inspection techniques have improved somewhat from the old poke and sniff method. In 1996, a new method was implemented known as the HAACP, which was developed in part by NASA. NASA had a vested interest in food safety because apparently diarrhea in zero gravity is a horrible experience for everyone on the ship. I think we can all agree on the importance of that one. Now, none of this has completely prevented some bad actors from doing the wrong thing. Depending on your age and attention span and memory, you might recall that the fast food chain Jack in the Box was responsible for an outbreak of E. coli that resulted in the deaths of 4 children and the sickening of more than 700 more people. This event raised a lot of awareness on the food safety issue and should be an indicator that the honor system just doesn't work. Now, since then, we've continued to see numerous outbreaks. It's a pet peeve of mine that the cause of these outbreaks often seems to be people farming leafy greens downstream from a confined animal feeding operation. In other words, the effluent from the animals makes its way into the spinach farm and then people get sick. What maddens me is that the industry and the press tend to blame the vegetables when in fact the origin of the pathogen was actually the animal operation. Now, my misgivings aside, the number of outbreaks that we continue to see should be a reminder to all of us that food safety matters. Inspectors are annoying. In fact, one of my heroes, Joel Salatin, might tell you that many of our FDA policies surrounding abattoirs are categorically designed to keep the little guy down while protecting the industry for the big players. Now, personally, I think he makes a good point, but I don't think we want to cut down or eliminate food inspection. There are just too many bad actors out there in an industry that has time and again demonstrated that it places profit above public safety. I personally would let Joel Salatin or his Polyface Farm slaughter my chicken any day of the week, but I know him to be a person of the utmost integrity, but that integrity is not typical of many of the large producers. Now, while I agree with Salatin that the laws should be modified in a way that allows small independents to operate abattoirs, we don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. The potentially E. coli contaminated bathwater in this case. But food safety matters. Even under our pre-Doge system, somewhere between 10 and 25% of all chickens that reach our shelves carry salmonella, and it's perfectly legal as salmonella, strictly speaking, is not considered an actual adulterant since it can be eradicated by cooking your poultry to 165 degrees. Now, did you hear that? 165 degrees. No medium rare chicken, and definitely no chicken sushi. Use a thermometer and cook your chick. In this environment, reducing food inspections is a terrible idea. Being unclear in how this information is presented to the public erodes trust. You may have mixed feelings about RFK. A lot of people do. You may have opinions on Doge that are different from mine, and while I'm going to do as best I can to keep this channel clear of partisan politics, this is definitely one situation where I have to say unequivocally that gutting the FDA is bad policy and threatens public safety. But as I've said before, you are not helpless and I am not hopeless. If you feel strongly about this, you can voice your opinion. Pay attention to the policies of the people you vote for. And, as many others before me have said, planting a garden is a radical act. If you really want to know where your food comes from, then follow it from seed to plate. If that's not realistic for you, and of course very few people can grow everything they need, then support your local farmers market. Join a CSA. Take care of the producers who will take care of you. It matters. It matters because you matter, and you are made out of food. So make sure you use good ingredients because you make the food, and then the food makes you. If you liked this video, make sure to like and subscribe and comment to help me keep making more videos. But for now, it is time for me to wrap up this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Ciao.